Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. on a week-to-week basis as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we go to a planet of 9 billion people by 2050, how we're going to be able to provide all the basic things that they need, the power, the water, the food, fuel, fiber, all those things that are needed, plus the education, healthcare, and jobs, of course. And we have someone sitting right beside me who is the expert in all those different areas, having traveled, lived around the world. This is Sarah Gamage. She is a Director of Gender, Economic Empowerment, and Livelihoods. This is the International Center for Research in Women, ICRW. And Sarah, welcome to Emerald Planet TV.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about your organization and some of the goals and missions that you have, and then we'll start talking about this very broad topic, all this empowerment, gender, and livelihoods.
Well, ICRW is a research organization, and we do research on gender equality with this idea that we can provide evidence and information and data, and we can work collaboratively with partner organizations to really push a gender equality agenda forward. And we work in this policy sphere, and we work also with programs. So we also do sort of collaborations, we do monitoring and evaluation, we look at best practices, and we try to get them out there.
Well, the whole thing about it, I understand you have over 600 of these projects that you've been involved in one way or another, and of course we're talking about the African continent specifically, but also you've done things in Latin America, the South Pacific, Eastern Europe, so you have a very broad brush as far as the world that you're looking at. But looking at the African continent, 54 countries, very diverse as far as socioeconomic, education, religion, natural resources within those areas. So under your title as the director for all these many things, how do you make all that work and balance all of that so that you're working with women and the youth in many different areas, but also the livelihoods and entrepreneurship, if we can use that as a broad brush? Well,
we're a very broad organization, as you've noted. We have headquarters in India. We have an office also in Kampala in Uganda, and we have the office in DC. And we work collaboratively with our partner organizations on a variety of different issues, from health to education to analyzing what works in terms of job training and skills development. So we really work in a way that's very holistic. We draw on people from entirely different backgrounds, and we think very much about what are the solutions that can be organically identified by communities that we can support in ways that can really expand women's opportunities and livelihoods.
I think it's absolutely fantastic, and that's one of the things that we really try to focus on, is to have at least 50% of our guests here that are female. And because when you get into many of these countries, you look at the small businesses, it could be as high as 80-85% are actually controlled and run by the women. So they really, in many ways, are the backbone of a lot of economies as far as these emerging market nations. So looking at this combination, the gender, but also you've really been looking at energy, renewables, and that sphere, but also environmental protection. So combining all that and still have the economic impact. How do you do that? So protect the environment, but also allow people to be able to feed their families and send their kids to school.
Well, I think you have to engage with the communities and the people who want to change their opportunities and they want to change their livelihoods. I think this is something that you work lockstep with the people who have their own solutions and can really make claims on different types of institutions and organizations to really move those forward. But I think we got into gender and energy through improved fuel wood stoves in the 90s, looking at ways to improve cooking, because we know that there are about 3 billion households out there that don't have secure energy, they don't have safe energy. So what you really need to do is find a solution that works for these households, but in ways that really builds on their skill sets and reflects their needs. And as you say, doesn't undermine their livelihoods. So from some of the work on improved fuel wood stoves, we started to build relationships to groups like the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves and Solar Sister, who you will hear about later on. And these are organizations that are working to improve cooking and improve the types of stoves and energy access that community have, particularly in rural areas, which is critical. Because if you want safe, clean cooking opportunities, you're going to have to start thinking beyond kerosene and beyond fuel wood. And so this is where we got into gender and energy. But it's not just about micro solutions, it's also about further up the value chain. How can communities make claims on their governments for better energy solutions and ones that are more compatible with their ecosystems and their livelihoods? You know, what kinds of microgrids are there that could be out there being used that can be governed by communities, where they talk about what pricing is and what the distribution should be and who has access to it?
Yeah, this whole thing about distributed energy, this is something we're working on in downtown Washington, D.C. and Ward 8, because you have many communities, just because they have access to the grid doesn't mean they can afford it. And if you don't have proper housing, you don't have proper weatherization and all these other things going on, you can have high-end affluent communities, but that doesn't mean everybody fits in socioeconomically in that whole thing. What are some of the key issues that you find when you're balancing this gender, the environment, and also energy?
Well, I think you really need to work with the communities to devise the kinds of solutions that are appropriate. But one of the key pieces of the work that we do globally is recognizing, reducing, and redistributing unpaid work. Women across the globe do most of the household maintenance and an awful lot of unpaid work. And what you really want to do is reduce the drudgery. Because if you're spending 3 to 5 hours a day gathering fuel wood and hauling water, what other opportunities do you have to learn, to try different job skills, to try different types of livelihood activities? And the drudgery of this, the physical hardship of this, is significant. So I think we want to work with the communities to identify solutions that both reduce drudgery but also increase livelihood opportunities. And if you can find some of those, then you can see opportunities to diversify the types of income generation that people engage in, to improve them, to improve the quality of their lives in their homes and beyond their homes.
Yeah, and this is the whole thing about females particularly are having to do this kind of work. They're the ones that are going out and scavenging, for wood or anything they can burn, goes into the household, and also for water, because this is something I think the average walk is about 2 miles, one way out, 2 miles back, and then they're not in school. So looking at the gender issue and then taking it down to the youth level, the drudgery, the hard physical work they have to go through. I was raised on a ranch, so from 5 to 8 years old, we were learning how to drive tractors, chase cattle, and ride horses, and do all those things. And fortunately, we survived. But in many of these communities, not only do you have the women, the young girls doing these things, but also in the areas where you have war, you have rape, and you have all these things as child slavery and things. So how do you deal with that so that not only the women are seeing a benefit to this, but going all the way down to the young female youth that are living in these households?
Well, I think if you begin to find solutions that address drudgery, you'll find that less people are exposed to drudgery and less people have to do it. There are some really simple solutions: basic infrastructure, lighting, rural electrification, pumps, water pumps. There are ways that you can devise interventions working with the communities that could significantly change the amount of time that women and children spend in these activities, freeing that time up for education, freeing that time up out for leisure even. So I think it's about working with communities to identify what solutions are possible, but it's also about supporting communities to make claims on the duty bearers, on the institutions around them that either provide or have failed to provide some of the infrastructure they need. I think in the context of war, you add a whole other set of insecurities and challenges, but also in the context of sort of great environmental stress, where you've got deforestation, where you've got desertification, where you've got saltwater infiltration of people's, irrigation and their wells. This is where we have to think creatively and collectively. This isn't a problem that is only for those who are experiencing it in some remote part of the globe. We are all collectively responsible for this and need to work towards improving it.
Yeah, and with your accent, we know you're from somewhere, the UK, of course, but somewhere from Europe, and you have millions that are fleeing these areas, the very places that you're talking about, because there's no way to sustain themselves. And that's not only just, for the females in the side, it's just anyone being able to sustain themselves in these particularly more rural areas, but many of these more shanty towns and other places where there's not that opportunity for employment and all that. So looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, what are they? And then looking at that, how does the work that you're doing through your organization go through to address those, highlight it so that people understand what they really are, and then what is the impacts so that we start to get at these and keep people in place so they're not having to migrate or not having to flee as either internal refugees or cross borders.
Right. Well, the Sustainable Development Goals are the follow-on.
You have to do this quickly. We only have about a minute and a half.
Okay, they're the follow-on to the MDGs, which was the Millennium Development Goals. This is a set of goals and targets that member states of the United Nations have signed on to address poverty and inequality in various manifestations, to provide decent work, to address climate change. There are 17 goals and various associated targets. We, as the International Center for Research on Women, mostly work on gender equality issues. So we focus very much on Goal 5, which is about gender equality. And we think that sustainable energy solutions that are driven by communities are a big part of reducing poverty, reducing drudgery, and improving the well-being of women and their families around the world. So we think that it will contribute significantly.
20 seconds. Where do you see your organization being in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
I hope working more closely and in lockstep with more community organizations that are demanding change.
Fantastic. This is Sarah Gamage. She is the Director of Gender, Economic Empowerment and Livelihoods, International Center for Research on Women, ICRW. And thank you for being with us and talking about this, because we need to see how we take care of now the majority, over 50% of the world, as we create the Emerald Planet.